Okay. Afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for the inaugural live stream of the California Proprietarian Podcast, or CAPropCast for short. As always, I'm your host, Philip Young, and on this show, we strongly believe in the individual natural right to private property. We defend that in every way we can. We believe that's a right that proceeds from God, from a divine source, and therefore it may not be justly revoked by man, and especially not by the state, without due process of law. So on every episode, we strive to discuss topics in popular discourse that have implications for private property rights, both here in the United States and often abroad. And I will be doing this myself this time, my first time without a guest, but it's also our inaugural live stream. So I'm quite excited. And what I'd like to primarily cover today is some of the news and the headlines that have recently been coming out of Europe, out of the United Kingdom specifically. As you all probably know by now, back on, believe it was July 30th, there was a mass stabbing carried out by a 17-year-old son of Rwandan immigrants to Britain. It was carried out in Southport, England, at a dance camp or something like that. It was like a dance summer camp with a Taylor Swift Eras Tour theme to it. And this teenager of Rwandan extraction, he carried out a random knife attack on the young women and girls that were attending this camp, and also on some of their instructors. And as of right now, my understanding is that the death toll stands at 3, and there are 10 injured, many of them seriously. They may be permanently debilitated by these injuries. And elsewhere in the UK and in other parts of Europe, these stabbing attacks and occasionally also bombings and shootings and rapes and sexual assaults have become shockingly and tragically common. And the common denominator that we see in so many of these cases is that the offenders are of a Muslim or immigrant background, whether they are immigrants themselves or whether they are the descendants, the immediate descendants of recent immigrants. And anytime someone in the Western world has the audacity to point this out, they're often called racist. They're called xenophobic. They are accused of being Islamophobic by the established powers, by the mainstream media, by major corporations, academia, institutions of higher education, by elected politicians and candidates for office. And the peoples of the Western world at this point are sick to death of it. They are. And I think part of the reason for that is that we've increasingly seen that these migrant hordes are especially dangerous to the young women and girls in our society. You may recall back in 2015 in Cologne, Germany, around 1,000, it was at least several hundred German women were groped or sexually assaulted by migrant men, many of whom were of Syrian or Afghan origin. And it occurred just in public in a major European city, in Cologne, Germany, in this case. And I think what people have come to understand, including a lot of young women of Gen Z and the millennial generation, they tend to be much further to the left on average than men of roughly the same age. But we're starting to see an awakening among this demographic to the dangers of mass third world immigration. And they're starting to wake up to the fact that in a lot of these third world and often Islamic countries where these offenders either come from or where they're descended from, they have no notion whatsoever of the rights of women. They do not respect the rights of women in the slightest. They don't even recognize it as a legitimate category of existence. And in their view, they are taught and socialized from when they can walk and talk that women are there to be used for their own pleasure or as tools for their convenience. And they are not taught at all that women should have any right to their own autonomy or to run or control their own lives to any degree, that they should have control over or autonomy over their own body even. And so it shouldn't surprise anyone that when hordes and hordes of these young men, often military age, are introduced wholesale into a Western classical liberal society, that when they look around and they see all these liberated women, it creates a real sense of dissonance within them that is invariably, in many cases, going to result in them overstepping boundaries with these women and girls, often with catastrophic effects. Best case scenario is there's increasing sexual harassment and leering and crude verbal comments made by these men of a migrant background in the streets toward women in Western developed countries. And at very worst, we're seeing sexual assaults and rapes and murders of these women. And finally, so many young women of Gen Z and the millennial generation in particular are willing to confront this reality. I think, honestly, because they partly feel forced to. They feel like they don't have a choice because they walk down the street. As Alex Phillips over in the United Kingdom was pointing out, she was saying how she can no longer walk down the street to her home, in many cases, to and from her home, without being leered at, without having crude comments directed at her by men of Middle Eastern or African or Islamic origin. And she has friends who have been assaulted, who have been groped. So these young women are starting to wake up to and recognize this reality, and as a result, they're increasingly voting for and supporting political parties, and movements that might even be far right, but they're willing to lend their support to these parties because they haven't been given a viable alternative. Every time they try to raise concerns, they're called racist, they're called far right, they're called fascist, they're called xenophobic or Islamophobic, what have you, the whole myriad. So we need to recognize the scale and the nature of the problem, and not only those who are directly causing the problems in the streets on a daily basis, but those who are facilitating and enabling it. And in the case of the United Kingdom, that is obviously the apparatus of the state. It's their law enforcement agencies, particularly their metropolitan police departments that you see in the neon jackets with those funny Victorian-era style hats. And what we've seen is in the aftermath of this mass stabbing in Southport, England, at the Taylor Swift dance-themed camp, something happened that we don't see often enough in the UK. There was a backlash against mass immigration, mass third world immigration, and the establishment that has imported these immigrants wholesale with promises of welfare services subsidized by the British taxpayer. And the English people, particularly the white working class, are sick to death of it, and so they started organizing protests. I think with the help of the online remnants of the English Defence League and other right wing groups and movements and subcultures over there in the UK. And naturally, of course, and understandably, some of those protests turned violent and riotous and disorderly. And what's interesting is we see so many cases, like as in the case of the grooming gang scandal in Rotherham and across the United Kingdom, when Muslims or when far leftists riot, or they burn, they loot, they pillage, they smash the windows of shops, they're often treated by kid glove. With kid gloves by the police and by the Crown Prosecution Service over there. And we saw when Black Lives Matter and Antifa riots swept the UK in the summer of 2020, at the same time the same thing was happening on this side of the pond. Those protesters were treated with kid gloves, despite the draconian pandemic lockdowns that had enveloped much of the world. And we see the same thing when Muslims riot or when Muslims sexually assault English women. We see that they're let off with these ridiculously light sentences, often non-custodial sentences. And whereas at these right-wing protests and rallies that have turned violent, you have a situation where a man's only crime was chanting at the police, "You're not English anymore." and he's sentenced to, I think it was something ridiculous. It was like 26 months in prison for, I guess insulting the police or engaging in anti-establishment rhetoric, or it was probably officially, racially aggravated harassment or incitement to racial hatred, which is an absurd category of crime. Certainly, it goes to show you what an anti-free speech police state the United Kingdom truly is these days. But in the meantime, Muslims and far leftists are getting away with egregious, violent, felonious criminal acts. One of the main pillars of this very serious problem are the law enforcement agencies of the United Kingdom. They are totally complicit in this. They are upholding a system that is making war against the British people, that is importing hordes of hostile migrants that are there to butcher them and kill them, and at a minimum are there to steal welfare services that the British people are forced to pay for, with exorbitantly high taxes at a time when Britain's National Health Service and their other public services are crumbling and are very backlogged and unable to keep up with the demand even presented by the inhabitants that already live in the UK, much less with an influx of needy third world migrants. So the police who are arresting these right-wing demonstrators for imagined thought crimes, for crimes that aren't even really crimes at all. They're completely victimless, and very often represent legitimate criticisms of the people in power and the establishment over there. These cops are the problem. These cops are tyrants. They are beating and abusing and assaulting English people and British people who are demonstrating in favor of their rights, that are expressing themselves very often peaceably, and are airing totally justified grievances. That's what's going on here. So these cops are guilty of tyrannical atrocities against the British people, and it's a real shame that the British people have, for the most part, been disarmed, because this is a level of tyranny that would not be tolerated here in the United States. I'm quite certain of it, or certainly in many parts of the United States at least. So it is high time in the United Kingdom, and probably in parts of Europe that are similarly afflicted, such as France. It is time for a mass uprising against the ruling class and the law enforcement agencies that have foisted this monstrosity upon their people, this series of usurpations and atrocities of their homelands. And those who are upholding a tyrannical system, cops, anyone with a badge, or anyone in a military force who is acting to uphold a tyrannical system in any way, are just as guilty as the tyrannical politicians or bureaucrats themselves. That they are just as guilty as the elected officials from which the orders flow, and the bureaucrats that execute those orders from behind a desk. So we can't afford to make any mistake, or we cannot afford at all to obfuscate or make excuses or issue phony justifications for the badge thugs that are foisting this crime upon the British and the French people, for example. So we in the Western world, and to a lesser extent here in the United States, that are afflicted with this system, we need to not only call out the tyrannical politicians and the bureaucrats from whom this tyranny flows. We need to call out the street level enforcers. And right now, honestly, I'm at the point I have no sympathy for a British police officer who is, violently attacking and unlawfully arresting right-wing demonstrators over, what happened in Southport, England recently, or who are demonstrating against the other consequences of mass immigration. I have no problem with it whatsoever when those police officers are attacked by these demonstrators in self-defense, because at some point something has to give. The British people have tolerated enough. These hordes of migrants have come into their country. They are using their public schools without paying for them. They are using their National Health Service without paying for them. They are, in many of the more egregious cases, they are grooming. They are forming grooming gangs, organized grooming gangs, and they are sexually assaulting young British women and girls. And so when football hooligans get together under the banner of the English Defense League or Patriotic Alternative or what have you, and they say enough is enough, we're going to resist, including physically if we have to, when these cops, unlawfully attack us and violate our rights and violate the rights of our friends and neighbors and our fellow British people. That is an entirely legitimate response to tyranny. If you look in the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson was very clear and very eloquent when he said that in order to secure fundamental, inalienable natural rights, governments are instituted among men. That's not verbatim, but that's what he was saying. That it is for the purpose of preserving individual rights that governments are instituted among men. And anytime any government becomes destructive of those ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. And right now, what needs to happen in Britain and France and much of the rest of Europe, and even to some extent here in the U.S., is the people need to rise up and alter or abolish these tyrannical forms of government that have their heels on their necks right now. That's what has to happen. And it's a real tragedy that it seems that only a few generations ago, Britain was at the height of her imperial glory. She brought to the world the gift of English common law, the gift of English due process, the gift of English protections for private property rights. They had arguably the fairest court system, judicial system in the world, and they brought the values of Anglo-Christianity. They took that global. The British notion of civilized order, of behaving as a virtuous citizen. These basic concepts, many of them are Anglo-Saxon or British in origin, and it is a real tragedy to see a once great empire that exported, those very esteemed values, dignified values throughout the world, to see it brought low like this. Where now it's an emaciated police state with a hyper bloated welfare state, with a declining citizenry, very high unemployment, very high inflation, crumbling public services that are overwhelmingly burdened by third world migrants who import crime and who disproportionately bring into that country. They bring in children with serious health problems and mental retardations due to the very high rate of inbreeding in cultures such as Pakistani and Bangladeshi and other Muslim cultures. So they bring in these welfare drains who, on top of being welfare drains, to add insult to injury, they're incredibly rapacious and predatory. And the London Metropolitan Police and the Crown Prosecution Service and other prosecutorial and police agencies around the United Kingdom are complicit in this. They are not only protecting these migrants as they go about these very predatory and outrageous activities against the native British people, but they are actively using force and violence to prevent the British people from rightly rising up against this travesty against them. So I would call upon the British people right now to recognize the tyranny that confronts you, to recognize the face of it, which is your very own police, to respond accordingly. And obviously always be smart and do your best to be safe. But this tyranny is absolutely intolerable. We have right-wing protesters over there whose crime was to criticize mass immigration, or as the BBC put it, to engage in anti-establishment rhetoric, that are being locked up as we speak. Their homes are being raided. Police are busting in their doors and windows, in the early morning and dragging them off to jail to face phony charges. It's a total police state over there, and the only thing left to do is rise up in armed defiance against the tyranny that clanks its chain at them like that. So this rhetoric might seem harsh. I want to be perfectly clear. I'm not inciting any unlawful activity, but I am calling against on people of goodwill who believe in individual liberty, who believe in the individual natural right to private property, who believe in the rule of law, who believe in due process of law, to do something about it and make their voices heard and be willing and able and ready to defend themselves by any means necessary against this totally unacceptable tyranny that rears its ugly head at them. And we've seen in France, also across the English Channel, that Muslim and migrant stabbing attacks and rapes have likewise become increasingly common. In Paris, 77% of the sexual assaults are committed by migrants. And you have to remember that that's the 77% that are committed by migrants themselves. It does not include figures for sexual assaults that are committed by the immediate descendants of migrants, so the children or grandchildren of migrants of Muslim origin, for example. So if we factor that in, the percentage of sexual assaults in the city of Paris that are committed by those of a non-ethnically French or Muslim origin, it's probably somewhere in the 90 percentile range, if I had to guess. I don't have the exact figures for that. But in Germany, you have a situation where there was I think about 18 months ago, there was a horrific gang rape by several I think about 9 migrant men of a 14-year-old girl, and I think 7 or 8 of the 9 men didn't even receive custodial sentences. One of them received a 2-year sentence, and one of them got called online on social media a pig, which he most certainly was, by a German girl, and she was prosecuted for calling him a pig. She was prosecuted and given a custodial sentence. So the outrage just never stops. So when you're dealing with that level of tyranny that so obviously hates you and hates your people and hates your native culture, the only thing left to do is rise up in armed defiance. The people of Europe are up against a wall. They have no other choice. And they are utterly justified in acting to, as Thomas Jefferson put it, once again, to alter or abolish that tyranny. So people of Europe, who are of goodwill and who are opposing and attempting to resist this tyranny, I salute you. You have a much worse situation over there than we do, so you could say it's easy for me to say the things I'm saying right here from the comfort of a studio where I'm protected by the First Amendment. But I want to say I salute you. You have my utmost respect and support, and just please don't give up hope. Don't lose courage. Don't tire, and just keep up that good fight. Keep escalating where you have to, but be smart about it. Try to be safe. And I'm going to keep monitoring the situation over there, and I'm going to do everything I can to raise up as much of a ruckus as I can over here on this side of the pond, and garner for you as much foreign support from here in the United States as I possibly can. So I'll keep monitoring the news and the airwaves from over there and the social media platforms. And until next time we address this topic, just please, again, don't lose hope or courage. Just keep up that good fight. Keep up the good fight, finish the race, and keep the faith. And as always, to everyone out there who sees this, Sic Semper Tyrannis.